I watched my mother sign away my trust fund to my stepsister Vanessa with the same pen she'd used to forge my signature on those college loan documents in my first life. There, Mom said, sliding the papers across the mahogany desk to our family attorney, Mr. Peterson. Madison has agreed to transfer her entire trust fund to Vanessa. She understands that Vanessa needs it more, what with her upcoming wedding to the senator's son and all. I sat perfectly still in the leather chair, my face a careful mask of resignation. In my previous life, this moment had destroyed me. I'd been 23, naive, and desperate for my family's love. I'd actually signed those papers myself, believing their lies that it was just a temporary loan, that they'd pay me back once Vanessa's wedding was over. They never did. In that first life, I'd spent the next 5 years struggling through graduate school on my own, working 3 jobs while Vanessa lived in a penthouse bought with my money. I'd watched from the sidelines as my parents threw her $1 million wedding, started her a business with my inheritance, and introduced her to every important contact they had. Meanwhile, I was the dirty secret they only acknowledged when they needed someone to blame for their own failures. The real knife in my back came when I was 28. I'd finally landed a good job, finally started to rebuild. Then I got the call that grandmother Adelaide, my father's mother, the only person who'd ever truly loved me, was dying. I'd rushed to the hospital, only to be stopped at the door by security. "I'm sorry, miss," the guard had said. "Your name isn't on the approved visitor list." Inside that room, my parents and Vanessa had surrounded my grandmother's deathbed, playing the role of devoted family. They'd kept me away during her final hours, and afterward, they'd had the audacity to tell me that grandmother had left everything to Vanessa because she was the daughter who'd always been there. The betrayal had hollowed me out. I'd gone home that night, climbed onto my apartment's roof, and, well, that life ended on cold concrete 12 stories down. But then I'd opened my eyes to find myself 16 again, sitting in my childhood bedroom with a decade of memories burning in my mind like acid. Now here I was, 7 years into my second life, watching this scene play out again with very different knowledge in my pocket. "Madison?" Mr. Peterson's voice cut through my thoughts. "Do you need a moment? This is a significant financial decision." "She's fine," my father interrupted, not even looking at me. He was scrolling through his phone, probably texting his mistress. "Madison understands that family comes first. Right, sweetheart?" The endearment was ash in my mouth. He'd never called me that in my first life. This time I'd been more useful to them, quieter, more compliant, easier to manipulate. I'd learned that fighting them only made things worse, but I hadn't. Been passive. "Of course, Daddy," I said softly, reaching for the pen. Vanessa couldn't hide her triumphant smirk. At 30, she was stunning in that calculated way that required a team of professionals. Professionals paid for with money that should have been mine. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her Chanel jacket. Her engagement ring, a 10-carat diamond, caught the light as she examined her manicure. "I'm so grateful, Maddie," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You know I'll pay you back eventually. Once Cameron and I are settled." Liar. She'd said the same thing in my first life. I signed my name on the line, and something in my chest loosened. In my previous life, this moment had been the beginning of my destruction. This time, it was the beginning of theirs. Because there was something my parents didn't know, something I'd made absolutely certain they'd never discover. 3 days after I'd woken up 16 again, I'd called my grandmother. Grandmother Adelaide had been sharp as a tack at 75, running her real estate empire with an iron fist despite my parents' best efforts to convince her to, slow down. In my first life, I'd been too intimidated by her wealth and power to reach out, too brainwashed by my parents' warnings that she was difficult and demanding. This time, I'd known better. I'd known that she was the only person who'd ever truly cared about me, even if I'd been too blind to see it before. I'd taken a bus to her downtown office that Saturday, bypassing my parents entirely. When her assistant tried to turn me away, I'd said the magic words, "Tell her Adelaide Madison Hayes wants to speak with her about the Hayes family ring." My full name, the one my parents never used, preferring just Madison to distance me from my grandmother's legacy. And the ring, the one she'd tried to give me before she died in my first life, the one my mother had lost before I could refuse it. Grandmother had seen me within 5 minutes. "You have your great-grandmother's eyes," she'd said, studying me across her massive desk. "Are you here for money?" "No, ma'am," I'd replied. "I'm here because my parents won't let me know you, and I think that's a mistake. For both of us." In that moment, something had shifted in her expression. She'd leaned forward, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I'd felt what it was like to have someone truly see me. Over the next 7 years, we'd built a relationship my parents never knew existed. I'd taken the bus to her office every Saturday, learned her business from the ground up, proved myself worthy of her legacy. She'd taught me everything: real estate development, investment strategies, how to spot a fraud from a mile away. She'd also changed her will. 6 months ago, Grandmother Adelaide had passed away peacefully in her sleep at 82. The funeral had been a circus, with my parents sobbing theatrically while Vanessa positioned herself for the cameras. They'd been so certain they'd inherit everything. Instead, the will reading had been private. Just me and Grandmother's legal team. Everything: the real estate empire worth $8.7 billion, the stock portfolios, the property in 15 countries, the art collection, every single asset had come to me. With one condition: the inheritance remained secret until my 30th birthday, or until my parents attempted to take my trust fund, whichever came first. "Your parents are parasites," Grandmother had told me months before she died, her hand thin and papery in mine. "But you, Adelaide, you're a Hayes. You'll know when the time is right to show them exactly what that means." I'd structured everything carefully. The inheritance was managed by a team of lawyers and financial advisors who reported only to me. My parents had no idea I'd even known Grandmother, let alone that she'd left me everything. To them, I was still just Madison, the disappointing daughter who'd given up her trust fund without a fight. They had no idea that the trust fund they'd just stolen was pocket change compared to what I already had. The signing completed, Mr. Peterson gathered the papers with an uncomfortable expression. He'd been Grandmother's attorney before my parents fired him and hired someone more flexible. He caught my eye for just a moment, and I wondered if he suspected something. "Well then," Mom said, standing and smoothing her skirt. "Vanessa, we should get going. We have that appointment with the wedding planner." "Maddie, you don't mind cleaning up here, do you?" Vanessa asked, gesturing vaguely at the conference room. "I'd help, but these shoes are new and—" "Of course," I said, still playing the role of the dutiful, beaten-down daughter. They left in a cloud of expensive perfume and false laughter, already discussing how to spend my money. Dad had barely spoken 10 words to me the entire meeting. I wasn't surprised. In his eyes, I'd never been as valuable as Vanessa, the daughter who came from his affair with my mother's former best friend, the daughter he'd legitimized by marrying Mom after his first marriage ended. I was just the unwanted child from my mother's first marriage, the reminder of her past, the daughter who looked too much like the father who'd left when I was 2. Once they were gone, Mr. Peterson turned to me. "Madison, I have to say—" "It's Adelaide," I interrupted quietly. "My name is Adelaide Madison Hayes." His eyes widened. "Hayes? You're not—" "Grandmother's sole heir," I confirmed. "And as of this signing, the secrecy clause in her will has been triggered. I think it's time everyone learned the truth, don't you?" For the first time in 7 years, I let myself smile. "Mr. Peterson, I'm going to need a very good attorney. Interested?" The story of how I'd ended up in this family was a tragedy wrapped in greed and narcissism. My biological father, James Morrison, had been a good man by all accounts. He'd met my mother, Rachel, when they were both young and idealistic. They'd married at 22, had me at 23, and by all the photos I'd found hidden in the attic, they'd been happy. Then James had died in a car accident when I was 2. He'd left my mother everything: a small but respectable life insurance policy, a house, and most importantly, a trust fund for me worth $750,000 to be released when I turned 18. My mother had mourned for approximately 6 months before she'd met Richard Hayes at a country club fundraiser. Richard was 35, newly divorced, and the disappointing son of real estate magnate Adelaide Hayes. Adelaide had effectively disowned him years earlier after he'd blown through his trust fund and proven himself incompetent at every business venture she'd given him. But Richard still had the Hayes name, and to my social climbing mother, that was everything. They'd married within a year. I'd been their flower girl, too young to understand that I was watching my life's trajectory shift toward darkness. The problems started immediately. Richard already had a daughter from his affair during his first marriage, Vanessa, who was 5 years older than me. His ex-wife had left her behind, wanting nothing to do with either of them, and Richard had been stuck with a child he'd never wanted and couldn't afford. My mother saw an opportunity. She loved Vanessa the way she'd never loved me, perhaps because Vanessa carried the Hayes blood that I didn't. Perhaps because Vanessa was beautiful and charming where I was awkward and quiet. Perhaps because loving Vanessa meant Richard loved her. Whatever the reason, I became the outsider in my own family. At first, it was subtle. Vanessa got the bigger bedroom. Vanessa's birthday parties were elaborate affairs, while mine were forgotten or hastily thrown together. Vanessa got piano lessons, dance classes, writing lessons. I got library books from the free box. As I got older, it got worse. My mother openly favored Vanessa, making excuses about limited resources while showering her stepdaughter with gifts. Richard ignored me entirely unless I'd done something wrong, which I inevitably had by the simple virtue of existing. When I turned 18 in my first life, they'd come for my trust fund. Family money should stay in the family, my mother had said. And since we've supported you all these years, it's only fair that we have access to it. I'd been so desperate for their approval that I'd agreed to let them manage it for me. Within 2 years, it was gone. Spent on Vanessa's college tuition, her apartment, her car, her shopping sprees. When I'd finally worked up the courage to ask about it, my mother had laughed. "You didn't think that money was just for you, did you? Family shares, Madison. That's what your father's money was. Family money." The gaslighting had been masterful. They'd convinced me I was selfish for wanting my own inheritance, ungrateful, for questioning their decisions, cruel for resenting Vanessa's success. And when grandmother Adelaide had died in my first life, they'd truly outdone themselves. They'd isolated me from her final moments, convinced her I was a spoiled brat who only wanted her money, and walked away with, they'd thought, the entire estate. The look on their faces when they'd learned grandmother had left most of her personal effects to charity and her money to various foundations, leaving them with just enough to settle her debts and pay for her funeral, had been almost worth the pain. Almost. Because they'd blamed me for that too. "If you'd been a better granddaughter," my mother had hissed at the wake, "maybe she would have left us something." They'd never known I'd been kept away deliberately. They'd never known she'd tried to find me, to reach out. They'd intercepted her calls and letters, spinning lies to us both. In my second life, I'd made sure things were different. The first time I'd sat in grandmother's office, she'd asked me about my parents. I'd been honest, perhaps too honest, the pain of my first life still raw. "They don't love me," I'd said simply. They never have. They kept me from you because they thought they could control your inheritance through me, but when they realized I was useless to them, they focused on Vanessa instead." Grandmother's eyes had hardened. "Richard is my greatest failure," she'd said. "I gave him every advantage, and he squandered them all. I'd hoped he might redeem himself through fatherhood, but it seems I was wrong." "He's not my father," I'd replied. "Not really. He's just the man who married my mother." "No," grandmother had agreed, "but I could be your grandmother. If you want me to be." I'd wanted it more than anything. Over the years, she'd taught me everything. Not just business, but how to carry myself, how to recognize my own worth, how to be a Hayes in the way her son had never managed. The Hayes family built our fortune on real estate, she'd told me during one of our Saturday sessions. But we maintained it through strategic thinking and iron will. You have both, Adelaide. Richard has neither. She'd also been brutally honest about what would happen when she died. Your parents will come for whatever they think they can get, she'd warned. They'll fight over my money like vultures, and they'll try to use you as a pawn. But I'm going to give you something they can't fight, can't steal, can't manipulate away from you. What's that? Power, she'd said simply. Real power, built on a foundation they can't shake. And the patience to use it wisely. The secrecy clause had been her idea. Let them hang themselves, she'd said. Let them steal from you, abuse you, show the world who they really are. And then, when the time is right, crush them. 6 months after her death, that time had finally come. The first call I made after Mr. Peterson agreed to represent me was to Marcus Chen, the head of grandmother's now my legal team. "Ms. Hayes," he answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional. "I saw the notification. Your parents triggered the clause?" "They signed papers transferring my trust fund to Vanessa an hour ago," I confirmed. "It's time. I'll have the full accounting ready within 24 hours. He said. "Where would you like us to begin?" I'd spent 7 years planning this moment, running through every scenario, every possible response they might have. Now it was finally here, and I felt nothing but cold, clean certainty. "Start with their lifestyle," I said. "I want a complete audit of how they've been living. Where's the money coming from?" Because I know Richard hasn't held a real job in 15 years, and Mom's interior design business is hemorrhaging money. "On it? Anything else?" "Yes, I want to know everything about Vanessa's fiancé and his family. Every connection, every weakness, every secret. If they're as powerful as my parents claim, they won't want to be associated with fraud and theft." "Consider it done. And Ms. Hayes, it's good to finally be moving forward. Your grandmother would be proud." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the conference room's window. At 23, I looked younger than I had at this age in my first life. The constant stress and overwork had aged me then. Now I was healthy, educated, and secretly powerful. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Thanks for being so understanding, sweetheart. Why don't you come to dinner tomorrow? I'm making your favorite." She'd never once made my favorite meal. She didn't even know what it was. I texted back, "Sounds wonderful. See you then." By tomorrow night, the first bombs would start falling. I wanted to watch their faces when they realized what was coming. The house I'd grown up in was a beautiful colonial revival in an affluent suburb, the kind of place that screamed old money, even though we had none. Richard and my mother had bought it shortly after their marriage, riding high on what remained of my mother's insurance money and Richard's rapidly depleting trust fund. By the time I was 10, they were already struggling to maintain the facade. The gardener was let go, the housekeeper reduced to once a week, the country club membership quietly dropped, but they kept up appearances, kept pretending we were Hayes family royalty, kept living beyond their means. I'd always wondered where the money came from. Now, thanks to Marcus's preliminary report that arrived that afternoon, I knew. They'd been embezzling from my trust fund for years, starting long before the official transfer. Forged signatures, fake receipts, elaborate schemes to drain the account without my knowledge. The $750,000 my father had left me? They'd systematically stolen nearly $600,000 of it before I'd even turned 18, leaving barely enough to make the transfer to Vanessa look legitimate. But that wasn't all. They'd also taken out credit cards in my name, racked up debt, and destroyed my credit score. In my first life, I'd discovered this at 25 when I'd been denied for an apartment lease. The debt collectors had been calling for years, but my parents had hidden all the mail. This time, I'd locked down my credit at 16, the moment I'd woken up with my memories intact. Every fraudulent attempt had been blocked and documented. Marcus's report outlined everything. 23 credit cards opened in my name, totaling $300,000 in debt. Student loans I'd never taken out. A mortgage on an investment property I'd never seen. All of it meticulously documented, dated, and traced back to my parents' accounts. It was enough to send them both to prison. I sat in my small apartment, the one I'd rented with money from my secret inheritance, the one my parents didn't know existed, and read through page after page of evidence. They'd been so arrogant, so certain I'd never find out, that they'd been sloppy. Bank transfers from my accounts to theirs. Receipts for Vanessa's expenses paid with my money. Even text messages between them, discussing how to keep Madison from asking questions. My mother, "Just act disappointed in her. She'll be too guilty to push." Richard, "Good thinking. The more pathetic she feels, the easier she is to control." I should have felt something, anger, hurt, betrayal, but I'd already felt all of that in my first life. Already screamed and cried and raged. This time, I felt only cold satisfaction. They'd given me everything I needed to destroy them. Dinner the next evening was exactly what I'd expected, a performance. Madison, darling. Mom swept me into a hug the moment I arrived, her perfume overwhelming. We're so glad you could make it. The dining room table was set with our fancy china, the stuff that only came out for important guests. Candles flickered between fresh flower arrangements. Classical music played softly in the background. Vanessa was already seated, looking stunning in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her fiancé, Cameron Ashford, sat beside her. He was handsome in that bland, privileged way. Perfectly coiffed hair, strong jaw, expensive suit that screamed trust fund baby. Madison! Vanessa stood to air kiss both my cheeks. I'm so glad you're here. I wanted you to meet Cameron properly. Cameron stood and offered his hand. I've heard so much about you. I'll bet you have, I thought. All lies, of course. It's nice to meet you, I said, playing the role of quiet, forgettable little sister. Richard barely looked up from his phone. Glad you could make it, Madison. We're celebrating. Celebrating? I took my seat at the far end of the table, the position I'd occupied my entire childhood. Vanessa was at Richard's right hand, the place of honor. Cameron's father just announced his run for governor, Mom said, bringing out a bottle of expensive wine. Isn't that exciting? Vanessa is going to be the daughter-in-law of a governor. Hopefully, Cameron said with practiced modesty. The race is just beginning. I accepted a glass of wine and stayed quiet, listening as they talked about polls and campaign strategies and fundraising galas. No one asked about my day or my life. I was scenery, useful only to make the family look complete. The meal was catered, I realized, not homemade. Another lie. So, Madison, Cameron said during a lull in conversation, clearly trying to be polite. What do you do? I'm finishing my master's degree in business administration, I said. All true. I'd been taking classes part-time funded by my inheritance. Real estate finance. Oh, how practical, Vanessa said with a little laugh. I could never stand all those numbers. Too boring. Yes, well, we can't all be Instagram influencers, my mother said, the dig at me barely concealed. In my first life, I'd worked retail while going to school. Apparently, in her mind, that was shameful compared to Vanessa's career of posting sponsored content and shopping. Actually, I said mildly, real estate development is quite interesting. Did you know that commercial properties in this area have appreciated by 47% in the last 5 years alone? Richard finally looked at me, his expression dismissive. Let's not bore everyone with business talk, Madison. Of course, sorry. The conversation moved on to wedding plans. Vanessa wanted a destination wedding in Italy, she announced. 300 guests, designer everything, a week-long celebration. It's going to cost a fortune, Mom said happily. But that's what the money is for, right? Creating perfect memories. My money, I thought, stolen from a dead man's legacy for his daughter, spent on another man's child. Madison, Vanessa said suddenly, her voice sweet as poison. I was thinking, would you want to be a bridesmaid? I know we haven't always been close, but it would mean so much to me. The table went silent, everyone watching me. I knew what this was, a test, a way to humiliate me further, to put me in an ugly dress and parade me around as the lesser sister while Vanessa shone. In my first life, I'd refused, and they'd held it over me for years as proof of my jealousy and bitterness. This time, I smiled. I'd be honored. Vanessa blinked, clearly surprised. She'd wanted me to refuse, to give her ammunition. My acceptance threw her off balance. Wonderful, Mom recovered quickly. Oh, this is going to be such a beautiful wedding. Cameron, your family must be so excited. They are, he said. But something in his expression had shifted. He was looking at me with more attention now, perhaps wondering why the disappointing daughter had a master's degree in business while his fiancé's only job was spending other people's money. Plant the seeds, I thought. Let him start to wonder. After dinner, as I was leaving, Vanessa caught my arm. Thanks for doing this, she said, her voice low. I know you're probably jealous, but I appreciate you being mature about it. I looked at her, really looked at her. At 30, she'd spent years being handed everything she wanted. She had no substance, no real skills, no identity beyond her looks and her ability to manipulate my parents. And she was about to marry into a political dynasty that would chew her up and spit her out the moment they discovered what she really was. I'm not jealous, Vanessa, I said honestly. I actually feel sorry for you. Her eyes flashed with anger, but I was already walking away. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The expose hit the society pages 3 days later. I hadn't written it, of course. I'd simply provided anonymous tips to a journalist known for investigating financial fraud in wealthy families. The kind of journalist who'd made a career out of exposing the rot beneath gilded exteriors. The headline read, "Hayes Family Scandal, Systematic Theft from Dead Father's Legacy." The article was meticulously researched, detailing years of financial abuse, forged signatures, embezzlement, identity theft, fraudulent credit cards. Every crime was laid out with dates, amounts, and documentation. It named Richard Hayes and Rachel Morrison Hayes as the primary perpetrators. It showed how they'd stolen from their daughter to fund their stepdaughter's lifestyle. It included quotes from anonymous family sources, me, describing years of emotional abuse and favoritism. But the real bombshell was buried in the third paragraph. Sources indicate that the victim of this long-running financial fraud may be Adelaide Hayes, the sole heir to the late Adelaide Hayes Sr.'s $8.7 billion fortune. I'd given them just enough to print, just enough to be verifiable through public records. Grandmother's will had been filed with the probate court 6 months ago. Anyone who knew where to look could confirm that Adelaide Madison Hayes, not Richard Hayes or his family, had inherited everything. My parents had never bothered to look. The article went viral by noon. By evening, it had been picked up by national news outlets. The Hayes name, grandmother's hard-earned legacy, was suddenly everywhere, but now associated with fraud and child abuse rather than business acumen. My phone exploded with messages, reporters wanting comments, old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly interested in my life, but nothing from my parents. They were in crisis mode, I knew, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to deny it, how to make it go away. At 9 p.m., Richard finally called. "What the hell have you done?" he roared, not even bothering with pleasantries. "I'm sorry," I kept my voice confused, innocent. "What are you talking about?" "The news story. Did you talk to the press?" "Why would I talk to the press?" "I don't understand." "Don't play dumb, Madison. Someone told them about—" He stopped abruptly, realizing he was about to admit to the crimes. "Told them about what?" I asked. "Dad, I'm confused. What's going on?" I could hear my mother in the background, her voice shrill with panic. "Is it true? About grandmother's will? Did she really leave everything to Madison?" There it was. The moment they realized they'd been playing the wrong game all along. "I need you to come home," Richard said, his voice tight. "Right now. We need to talk." "I can't. I have class in the morning." "Madison, come home now." "Okay," I said, injecting fear into my voice. "Okay, I'm coming." I hung up and smiled. Time for Act 2. When I arrived at the house, every light was on. Through the windows, I could see them pacing, arguing, their careful masks completely gone. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and walked in. They were in the living room, Mom, Richard, and Vanessa. The TV was on, playing a news segment about the scandal. My photo, an old, unflattering one from high school, was displayed on the screen next to grandmother's official portrait. The victim, Adelaide Madison Hayes, was apparently estranged from her family for years, deliberately kept from her grandmother by her parents, who sought to control the inheritance themselves. "Turn it off!" Mom snapped at Vanessa, who fumbled for the remote. They all turned to look at me. I stood in the doorway playing the frightened daughter I'd once been. "What's going on?" I asked. "The news said—" "Is it true?" Vanessa demanded. "Did grandmother really leave you everything?" I nodded slowly, watching their faces change. "I didn't tell you because you're a sneaky little bitch," Vanessa snarled, her beautiful face twisted with rage. You've been hiding this for 6 months? Let us steal your trust fund when you're secretly a billionaire? You knew? I let my voice rise, let the anger I'd been holding back seep through. You knew you were stealing from me? Don't be dramatic, Mom said, but her voice was shaking. We didn't steal anything. We simply reallocated family resources. By forging my signature? By opening credit cards in my name? By destroying my credit score? I pulled out my phone and brought up the photos I'd taken of the report. I have documentation of everything you've done. Every crime, every lie, every dollar you stole. The silence was deafening. Madison, Richard said, switching to a conciliatory tone. Sweetheart, let's not be hasty. We're family. We can work this out. I'm not your family, I said clearly, and I never was. You made that abundantly clear my entire life. We raised you, Etsa, Mom shrieked. Clothed you, fed you, gave you a home. And this is how you repay us? By airing our family's private business to the media? I didn't talk to the media, but I won't lie if they ask me direct questions either. You'll ruin us, Vanessa said, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. Cameron's family. They'll call off the wedding if this scandal gets worse. You're going to cost me everything? No, I said softly. You cost yourself everything. All of you. Every time you chose cruelty over kindness, lies over truth, Vanessa over me. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. We can fix this, Richard said desperately. Why? We'll pay you back every penny. We'll make a statement. Say it was all a misunderstanding. With what money? I asked. You're broke. You've been living beyond your means for years, stealing from me to maintain the illusion of wealth. Where exactly will you get $900,000? The number hit them like a physical blow. I'd added up everything. The trust fund, the credit card debt, the fraudulent loans, $900,000 of theft, documented and provable. You can't do this to us, Mom whispered. Madison, please. I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother when you chose a man over your own child, I said. When you let him ignore me, favor his daughter, treat me like an unwanted burden. When you stole the only thing my real father left me and gave it to her. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Vanessa? I called Cameron's family lawyer this afternoon. Gave them copies of all the financial documents. They'll want to review them before the wedding, I'm sure. Just to make sure they understand exactly what kind of family their son is marrying into. Vanessa's face went white. You didn't. I did, because unlike you, I actually care about people not getting scammed. Cameron seems nice. He deserves to know the truth. I left them there, stunned and silent, and drove back to my apartment with the windows down and freedom in my lungs. Phase 1 was complete. They knew I had power now. They knew they couldn't control me anymore. But I wasn't done, not even close. The next 2 weeks were glorious chaos. Cameron's family did indeed review the documents. Within 3 days, the engagement was off. Apparently, old political money doesn't like being associated with fraud and theft. Cameron himself tried to defend Vanessa at first, but when the full extent of my parents' crimes became clear, when he realized that his fiancée had knowingly lived off stolen money for years, even he couldn't justify it. Vanessa called me 16 times the day he broke it off. I answered on the 17th. You ruined my life, she screamed. He was my chance at everything, and you destroyed it. I didn't destroy anything, I said calmly. I just told the truth. If the truth destroyed your relationship, that says more about the relationship than it does about me. I hate you. I've always hated you. You know that? You were always there, always reminding Dad that he'd failed, that he'd knocked up some nobody and gotten stuck with someone else's kid. I know, I said. You made it very clear. All of you did. What do you want? She asked, her voice breaking. Money? Is that what this is about? Fine, I'll pay you back. Just please. Make this go away. Help me fix this. I don't want your money, Vanessa. I want you to understand what you took from me. Not the money, the years, the childhood I should have had, the love I deserved, the relationship with my grandmother that you all kept from me. She was Dad's mother, and I was her granddaughter, the only grandchild who actually cared about her, who spent time with her, who learned from her. You know what she told me before she died? She said she tried to see me when I was little, but Mom and Richard kept us apart. They were afraid she'd poison me against them, that she'd give me money they couldn't control. Vanessa was silent. You had everything, Vanessa. Parents who loved you, a trust fund, a privileged life. You could have been kind to me, could have been a real sister. Instead, you joined them in making my life hell. So no, I'm not going to help you fix this. You did this to yourself. I hung up. She didn't call back. Meanwhile, the legal machinery was grinding into motion. Marcus and his team had filed criminal complaints for identity theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The district attorney, perhaps motivated by the high-profile nature of the case, had taken it on personally. My parents hired a lawyer, an expensive one they couldn't afford, probably already planning how they'd default on his fees. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The court date was set for 3 months out. In the meantime, restraining orders prevented them from contacting me or accessing any accounts with my name on them. Their assets were frozen, pending investigation. The house I'd grown up in, I learned, was mortgaged to the hilt. They'd taken out 3 loans against it, using my forged signature as a co-signer. When the fraud came to light, the bank had started foreclosure proceedings. I bought the mortgage from the bank through one of my shell companies, then immediately initiated my own foreclosure. They'd be homeless within 60 days. Vanessa's apartment, the penthouse she'd lived in for 5 years, the one paid for with my trust fund, reverted to me. I had the locks changed while she was out and had her belongings put in storage. When she showed up at my apartment building, screaming and pounding on my door, security escorted her away. My mother's interior design business, which existed primarily as a tax write-off for their theft, collapsed when her clients learned about the scandal. No one wants their home designed by a woman who embezzled from her own child. Richard, who hadn't worked a real job in 15 years, was unemployable. The Hayes name that had once opened doors now closed them. No one wanted to be associated with the family that had stolen from Adelaide Hayes's heir. I watched it all unfold with clear eyes and no guilt. They'd made their choices. I'd simply ensured those choices had appropriate consequences. The court hearing was everything I'd hoped for and more. I arrived early, dressed in one of grandmother's vintage Chanel suits, altered to fit me perfectly. My hair was styled by her former stylist. I wore her pearls, her rings, her watch. I looked every inch the Hayes heir I'd become. My parents and Vanessa arrived separately, all of them looking haggard. Mom's designer wardrobe had been replaced with off-the-rack clothing. Richard's expensive car had been repossessed. I'd seen him arrive in a taxi. Vanessa wore sunglasses inside, hiding what I assumed were tears or dark circles or both. The courtroom was packed. The media hadn't been allowed inside, but word had spread. I recognized several of grandmother's former business associates, her friends, her colleagues. They'd come to see justice for her memory. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. The forged signatures, the embezzled funds, the credit fraud, the false loans. Document after document, each one damning. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that it was a family matter, that I'd been complicit, that there was no real victim. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then I looked directly at my parents. Tell us about your relationship with the defendants, the prosecutor said. They aren't my parents, I said clearly, and not in any meaningful way. Richard Hayes married my mother when I was 3 years old. From that point on, I was treated as an inconvenience in my own home. I detailed years of abuse, not physical, but emotional and financial. The favoritism toward Vanessa, the gaslighting, the deliberate isolation from my grandmother, the systematic theft that had begun when I was too young to even know I had a trust fund. When did you first become aware of the theft? The prosecutor asked. I could have told the truth, that I'd known since the moment I woke up 16 again with a decade of memories. But that would raise questions I couldn't answer. I discovered it during my junior year of college, I said instead. I tried to access my trust fund to pay tuition, and I learned that most of it was gone. When I confronted my parents, they convinced me that they'd invested it poorly, that it was an honest mistake. I believed them because I wanted to believe them, because I still hoped they loved me. My voice didn't crack, but I let pain show in my eyes. The jury was watching me carefully. And later, the prosecutor prompted, later, I learned my grandmother had been trying to contact me for years, that my parents had intercepted her calls and letters. When she was dying, they kept me away from her. I never got to say goodbye. This was true. In my first life, they'd stolen that from me. The fact that I'd gotten it back in this timeline didn't erase the original crime. Why do you think they did that? They were afraid, I said simply. Afraid that if I knew my grandmother, if I formed a relationship with her, she might leave me something in her will, and they were right. She did leave me everything, because unlike them, she actually loved me. The defense tried to paint me as a vindictive daughter, ungrateful for my upbringing, but the evidence was too strong. The jury saw through every attempt at manipulation. After 3 days of testimony, the verdict came back, guilty on all counts. Richard Hayes was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. Rachel Morrison Hayes received 4 years. Vanessa, who'd been less directly involved but had knowingly benefited from the crimes, received 2 years of probation and was ordered to repay $300,000, her estimated share of the stolen funds. The judge's final words were damning. You stole from a child who trusted you. You perverted the very notion of family for your own gain. You systematically destroyed your daughter's inheritance and credit, all while enriching yourselves and your preferred child. This court finds your actions reprehensible and the sentence is appropriate. As they were led away in handcuffs, my mother turned to look at me one last time. Her eyes were full of hate, not regret. She still didn't understand what she'd done wrong, still thought I was the villain for exposing their crimes. I met her gaze and felt nothing. The aftermath of the trial brought changes I hadn't expected. First, the media attention. I'd gone from unknown to infamous overnight. The story had everything: betrayal, billions, justice. Every tabloid wanted an interview. Every news program wanted me on their show. I declined them all except one, a respected financial journalist who'd covered grandmother's career. The interview was tasteful, focusing on her legacy and my plans to continue her work, rather than on the lurid details of my parents' crimes. Your grandmother was known for her charitable work as well as her business acumen, the journalist said. Do you plan to continue that tradition? Absolutely, I said. In fact, I'm establishing the Adelaide Hayes Foundation for Abused and Neglected Children. The foundation will provide legal assistance, financial support, and therapy for young people who've been exploited by their families. No child should go through what I did. The announcement made national news. Within a week, donations were pouring in from people who'd heard my story and wanted to help. Other victims of financial abuse came forward, sharing their own stories. I hired Marcus's firm to handle the foundation's legal work pro bono. They were thrilled. It was good publicity and aligned with their values. We created a network of attorneys willing to take on family fraud cases, helping victims navigate the complex legal system. Second, the business community. Once they learned I was Adelaide Hayes' legitimate heir, trained by her personally, doors opened that had been firmly closed to Madison, the neglected stepdaughter. I was invited to join boards, speak at conferences, invest in startups. People who'd ignored me for years suddenly wanted my advice, my money, my name on their letterhead. I was careful about who I worked with. I'd learned from grandmother that your reputation is built on the company you keep. I chose partners who shared my values, who treated their employees well, who built sustainable businesses rather than quick profits. The Hayes real estate empire grew under my leadership. I'd spent 7 years preparing for this moment, studying every aspect of the business. I knew which properties to sell, which to develop, where to expand. Within a year, the company's value had increased by 23%. Third, and perhaps most surprisingly, new family connections. Grandmother had mentioned having a younger sister who'd moved to Europe decades ago. I tracked down her descendants, second cousins I'd never known existed. They were warm, kind, genuinely interested in knowing me. Adelaide talked about you constantly in her final years, one cousin told me over video chat. She said you were the one who finally understood the Hayes legacy, the one who could carry it forward. They'd had no idea I existed before grandmother's will made news. My parents had kept me isolated not just from grandmother, but from the entire extended family. Our family is complicated, another cousin explained. A lot of egos, a lot of old money politics, but Adelaide was always the moral center. She earned every penny herself, built the empire from almost nothing. She didn't tolerate laziness or entitlement, which is why she cut off Richard. I understand, I said. She taught me the same values. They invited me to visit, to meet the European branch of the family. I went, nervous but hopeful, and found something I'd never had: real family. People who were interested in me for myself, not for what I could give them. 6 months after the trial, I decided to visit my parents in prison. Not out of forgiveness, but closure. I started with my mother. The visitor's room was bleak. Concrete walls, metal tables, guards watching everything. She appeared wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair graying and unstyled, her face aged 10 years and 6 months. She sat down across from me and said nothing, just stared. "I came to tell you something," I said. "Something I should have told you years ago." She waited. "I forgive you," I said. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Not because you deserve it," I continued. "Not because what you did was okay or understandable, but because holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting you to die. I forgive you for my own peace of mind." "Then help me," she said immediately, her hand reaching across the table. "If you forgive me, get me out of here. You have billions. Hire better lawyers. Pay off whoever you need to." I pulled my hand back. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing consequences. You committed crimes. You're serving the time you were sentenced to. That's justice. Justice? She laughed bitterly. You destroyed our lives over money. Money that should have been shared with family anyway. It wasn't about the money, I said. It was never about the money. It was about you choosing a man over your daughter, choosing his child over yours, making me feel worthless and unwanted in my own home. The money was just the final betrayal, the proof that you never saw me as your child at all. I did the best I could. No, I interrupted. You did the minimum required by law, and sometimes not even that. The best you could would have looked like love, support, protection. Instead, I got neglect and theft. I stood up. I won't be visiting again. I just wanted you to know I'm happy, I'm successful, I'm surrounded by people who actually care about me. You took away my childhood, but you don't get my future. That's mine. And I'm going to make it everything you tried to prevent. I left her sitting there, her face twisted with rage and self-pity. Richard was even worse. He didn't apologize, didn't show remorse. Instead, he tried to manipulate me one last time. You know I never wanted your mother to treat you that way, he said. I tried to get her to be fair, but she was so focused on Vanessa. Don't, I said tiredly, don't try to rewrite history. You ignored me for 20 years. You made it clear every single day that I wasn't your daughter, wasn't worthy of your attention or love. You stole from me without hesitation and would have continued if you hadn't been caught. I was trying to hold the family together, he insisted. Your mother was depressed, struggling. Giving Vanessa opportunities made her happy. At my expense, I said. Always at my expense. And you never once thought that was wrong because you never saw me as a real person. Just an inconvenient reminder that your wife had a life before you. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. My mother never would have left you everything if you hadn't poisoned her against us. You manipulated an old woman. Your mother was the sharpest person I've ever known, I snapped. She saw through you years before I was born. She saw through your schemes, your entitlement, your weakness. She left me everything because I was the grandchild who actually cared about her, who learned from her, who embodied the values she built her empire on. You were her son and she still chose me. What does that tell you? I stood up. Goodbye, Richard. I hope prison teaches you something about consequences, though I doubt it will. As I walked out, I heard him shouting after me, but I didn't turn around. I visited Vanessa last, mostly out of curiosity. She was at a minimum security facility serving her probation time, living in a halfway house. She looked terrible. The beauty that had defined her entire identity was fading without expensive treatments and careful styling. She wore no makeup. Her hair hung limp and unwashed. Her eyes were sunken. "Are you here to gloat?" she asked, her voice flat. "No," I said. "Honestly, I'm here because I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you hated me so much. We were just kids when our parents got married. I didn't choose to be born any more than you did. What did I ever do to deserve the way you treated me?" She was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "You were proof that Dad made mistakes, that he was just a normal guy who knocked up his girlfriend and had a kid he didn't plan for. You ruined the story." "What story?" "The one Mom told me. That Dad was special, a haze, better than everyone else. That we were special. But then there was you, and you were just there, this awkward, quiet kid who didn't fit. You made everything messy. So, you decided to make my life hell?" "I decided to make sure everyone knew who was the real daughter and who was the mistake," she said. "Except it turns out I was wrong. You were the one who mattered all along." "I didn't matter because of blood or inheritance," I said. "I mattered because I treated people with kindness and respected myself enough to set boundaries. Those are things you could have chosen too." "Could I?" She laughed bitterly. "I was raised by those two. They taught me that love was transactional, that value came from what you could take from others. By the time I understood that was wrong, I'd already become exactly like them." "It's not too late to change what," I said. "Yes, it is. I'm 30 years old with a criminal record. No skills, no money, no prospects. The only thing I was ever good at was being pretty and charming, and that was always borrowed power. Now I have nothing." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd been poisoned by the same parents who'd neglected me, just in a different way. They'd made her believe she was special without teaching her to be valuable. They'd given her everything without teaching her gratitude. They'd ruined her too, just more subtly. "I'm starting a program through my foundation," I said. "For people like us, people who grew up in toxic families and need help breaking those patterns. It includes therapy, job training, life skills. If you're interested, I can get you in." She looked up at me, suspicious. "Why would you help me?" "Because staying angry at you takes energy I'd rather spend on something positive. And because you're right, you were raised by them. But unlike them, you have time to become someone different. I don't deserve your help." "Probably not," I agreed, but I'm offering it anyway. What you do with it is up to you." I left her my contact information and walked out. I didn't know if she'd take the offer, and honestly, I didn't care that much. I'd done what I needed to do for my own peace of mind. 1 year after the trial, I held a charity gala for the foundation. It was held in the ballroom of one of my grandmother's hotels, the kind of elegant affair she'd loved. 500 guests attended, including celebrities, politicians, business leaders, and most importantly, the children and families we'd helped. We'd already provided legal assistance to over 200 families, helped freeze or recover millions in stolen funds, and gotten dozens of parents prosecuted for financial abuse. I wore a custom gown in the Hayes family blue, a color my grandmother had always loved. Her jewelry adorned my neck and wrists. Her portrait hung in the place of honor, watching over the proceedings. I gave a speech about breaking cycles of abuse, about the importance of protecting children, about building a legacy of kindness rather than cruelty. People cried. They donated millions more. Afterward, as I mingled with guests, one of my European cousins approached with a young woman about my age. "Adelaide, I want you to meet someone," he said. "This is Isabella. She runs our family's charitable foundation in Italy." Isabella smiled warmly and extended her hand. "I've heard so much about you. Your grandmother spoke of you with such pride." "She did?" "Oh, yes. The last time I saw her, just months before she passed, She said she'd finally found her true heir, someone with her fire and her heart. She said you would do great things. Tears stung my eyes. I didn't get to say goodbye to her in my first. I stopped catching myself. I didn't get to tell her how much she meant to me before she died. She knew, Isabella said gently. Trust me, she knew. And she's proud of you. We all are. As the evening wound down, I stepped out onto the hotel balcony looking out over the city. From here, I could see 3 buildings I owned, including the one where my parents had stolen my trust fund in that lawyer's office what felt like a lifetime ago. I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life, broken, defeated, ultimately destroyed by the people who should have loved her most. I thought about her standing on a rooftop, deciding that death was better than the pain of living. That girl had died, but she'd also given me a gift. The knowledge of what would happen, the strength to prevent it, and the wisdom to build something better. I wasn't religious, but I sent a thought out to wherever that first Adelaide had gone. We did it. We won. And it was worth every moment of waiting, every careful plan, every strategic move. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Just finalized the acquisition of Morrison and Hayes Design. My mother's business, the one she'd founded with stolen money, the one that had collapsed when her crimes came to light. Someone had bought the name and assets in the bankruptcy auction. That someone was me through another shell company. What are you going to do with it? Marcus had asked when I told him to buy it. Rename it Hayes and Morrison Foundation Interior Design, I'd said. A nonprofit that provides free home renovations for families affected by financial abuse. We'll hire people rebuilding their lives, train them in design and construction, help them develop real skills. Using your mother's business to help her victims, Marcus had said, grinning. Your grandmother would love that. She would have. Grandmother had always believed in poetic justice. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. This is Vanessa. I'm interested in the program. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Call my assistant tomorrow. She'll set something up. Maybe Vanessa would change. Maybe she wouldn't. But I'd given her the same chance I'd been given. The chance to start over, to become someone better. The difference was she'd have to earn it herself. No one was going to hand her success or happiness. She'd have to work for every inch of progress, face her flaws honestly, and choose to be better than she was raised to be, just like I had. I returned to the ballroom as the last guests were leaving. The staff were beginning to clean up, carefully packing away the decorations and unsold auction items. Everything had gone perfectly. As I supervised the breakdown, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors. I looked like my grandmother, not physically, but in the set of my shoulders, the confidence in my bearing, the quiet certainty in my eyes. She'd taught me so much in our 7 years together. Not just business, but how to be strong without being cruel, how to fight without losing myself, how to turn pain into purpose. Thank you, I whispered to her memory, for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me the tools to save myself. I left the hotel and walked to my car, a sensible luxury sedan, nothing too flashy. I'd learned from grandmother that true wealth didn't need to scream for attention. As I drove home through the city lights, I thought about the future. I was only 24. I had decades ahead of me to build on her legacy, to help others, to prove that cycles of abuse could be broken. I had billions in assets, but I'd learned that money was just a tool. What mattered was what you did with it, who you helped, what you built. My parents had taught me what not to be. My grandmother had taught me what I could be. And my own determination, forged in the crucible of betrayal and reborn through fire, had taught me who I was. I was Adelaide Madison Hayes, heir to a real estate empire and a legacy of strength. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd died once and come back with the knowledge to save herself. And I was just getting started. 5 years later, I stood in a different courtroom for a very different reason. Ms. Hayes, you've petitioned to legally change your name, the judge said, reviewing the paperwork. Can you explain why? Yes, Your Honor, I said. When I was born, my mother named me Madison Morrison after her maiden name. When my stepfather married her, they kept Morrison as my middle name but didn't formally give me the Hayes name. I'd like to fully claim My grandmother's legacy by becoming Adelaide Madison Hayes legally, not just professionally. The judge smiled. Given everything that's come out about your case, I think this is more than appropriate. Petition granted. I walked out of that courthouse with new legal documents and a sense of completion. I was finally, officially, completely myself. That evening, I attended the opening of the Adelaide Hayes Center for Financial Justice, a legal clinic and resource center dedicated to helping victims of family fraud. It was our fifth such center, with more planned for cities across the country. At the ribbon cutting, a young woman approached me nervously. She couldn't have been more than 19, with haunted eyes that reminded me of my own past. Ms. Hayes, I just wanted to say thank you. Your foundation helped me get away from my parents. They were stealing my student loans, ruining my credit, controlling everything. I didn't think anyone would believe me or help me, but your lawyers did. I'm free now because of you. I took her hand. You're free because of your own courage. We just provided the tools. What you did with them was all you. Still, she said, tears in her eyes. Thank you for showing us that it's possible, that we can survive and thrive. After she left, I stood there thinking about the ripples. Every person we helped would go on to help others, either directly or by breaking their family's cycle of abuse. Every child we protected would grow up to protect other children. Every dollar recovered would go on to fund better lives. My phone rang. I checked the caller ID and smiled. Isabella, how are things in Milan? Wonderful, my cousin said. The European branch of your foundation is thriving. We've helped 50 families in the last quarter alone. But I'm calling because I have news. Oh? The family council voted. We want to officially recognize you as the matriarch of the Hayes family, Adelaide's successor in spirit and in fact. I sat down heavily on a nearby bench. The Hayes Family Council, the collective leadership of our sprawling global family, was recognizing me as my grandmother's heir in all the ways that mattered. I don't know what to say, I managed. Say yes, Isabella laughed. Say you'll accept the responsibility of carrying our family's legacy forward with honor and wisdom. Say you'll help guide the next generation to be worthy of the Hayes name. Yes, I said. I accept. After we hung up, I sat there for a while watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere in a minimum security prison, my stepfather Richard was serving his sentence. Somewhere in a small apartment, my mother was finishing her time and facing a future with no money, no prospects, and no family to exploit. Somewhere in a therapy group, Vanessa was, hopefully, learning to be a better person. And here I was, surrounded by real family, meaningful work, and the peace that came from knowing I'd not only survived, but transcended. My first life had ended on a rooftop in despair. My second life had been reborn in vengeance and justice. But this ongoing journey of healing, helping, and building something lasting, this was my real life. The one I'd earned, the one I deserved. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I kept a running letter to my grandmother. I'd started it after she died and added to it whenever something significant happened. Dear grandmother, they made me matriarch today. The council, the cousins, everyone. They see me as your true heir, not just in wealth, but in spirit. I hope I make you proud. I hope every decision I make honors your memory. I hope the empire we built together continues to grow and help people for generations to come. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for loving me when I felt unlovable. Thank you for teaching me that power without compassion is just cruelty, but compassion without power is just sympathy. You gave me the tools to save myself, and now I'm using them to save others. I miss you every day, but I carry you with me in everything I do. With love and gratitude, Adelaide, I saved the note and stood up, ready to return to the celebration. There was more work to do, more people to help, more legacy to build. But for now, in this moment, I let myself feel what I'd never felt in my first life. Complete, unconditional victory. I had won. Not just against my parents and Vanessa, not just in recovering my inheritance, but in becoming someone worthy of my grandmother's faith. I had taken the ashes of betrayal and forged them into something beautiful. And I was never going back to being that broken girl on the rooftop. Never again.